Start?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
take it away.
So some of you know me, some of you don't know me so well. I'm Jen, and I started my business Silver Wheel Coaching a couple years ago. Before that, I worked at a trauma recovery center for about 7 years, where I did a lot of different things. And while I was there, I developed a non-12-step relapse prevention program and redesigned a few of our other programs there. But while I worked there, I was living on site. And let me tell you about a very intense experience, because when clients are having a meltdown at 3 a.m, they come knock on your door, which that's why I'm there, but it gets pretty intense. And so other therapists who did not live on site were always telling me, you need to be careful, you need to watch out for burnout, you need to practice self-care. And I would always be like, okay, like I know these words, but what do they actually mean? And everyone would be like, yeah, you know. And I'm like, no, I don't. And so they would suggest things that don't work for me. Like, they're like take a bubble bath. And I'm like, I hate baths. If I'm going to get in the water, I'm going to go to one of the coasts and jump in the ocean. Like, I'm going to get in the water, not a bubble bath. And so out of self-defense, I started doing a lot of research, and I went down a 3-year rabbit hole of research. And in the beginning, I was focused on like secondary stress and vicarious trauma things because it was a trauma center. And when I came back, I realized I had all this great information to teach people how to work with burnout. And I also had this new realization of what self-care is. And so I started developing those different pieces. And the self-care is like a basic part of any program, whether I'm working with people with substance, if they're just trying to figure out their life, if they're dealing with burnout, if they're dealing with trauma, it doesn't matter, because self-care and mindfulness are like the cores of what I do for anything else. And I love sharing it. So I'm so glad you guys are all here. And so last week, we were talking about what can lead to burnout and our signs and symptoms. And like we talked about last week, just because those things are happening as far as like causes, things that do lead to burnout, that doesn't mean you're necessarily going to burn out. But, there are things to watch out for. And one of the things we kind of talked about was getting a degree of separation between our work life and our personal life. And we know realistically, like especially COVID showed everyone, like there's really no complete separation between work and personal life. Like there's always some blend. That's just life. But when we work on, this different way of looking at scheduling your business hours with looking at your 168 hours a week, that's a start, because we're starting to prioritize your needs and your family's needs. And then we can work around business needs, right? We also talked about keeping our identity separate from our business, because yes, our business, we're doing it hopefully because we're passionate about it, but we are not our business. Our business is not us. And things going well or poorly in our business does not mean we're good or bad, right? These are two separate things, and it's hard to keep those two distinguished. And another thing that I didn't mention last time was burnout can also start to happen when our personal values are in conflict with our actual needs at the moment, right? And to give you just it's kind of a silly example, but it's just kind of an example of earlier this year, I have a little piece of my property that was neglected for 6 decades by the previous owners. And so I'm kind of reclaiming it and turning it into a little xeric low water garden that feeds wildlife and me. And so I had ordered in the fall like 100 seedlings, because they're seedlings, they're quick, they're easy, right? Well, then came spring, and my business had hit a slump. So I'm doing things to try to advertise right and trying to keep up with the clients I have. Plus, I have all this stuff I need to do outside, and these little seedlings are going to die. And so here we have this conflict, right? And then one of my values is healthy eating. And so I found myself every day just too exhausted to think about cooking. And so I go to Costco because where else are you going to find 3 pounds of frozen organic blueberries for $8? And they have the little rotisserie chickens. And I know those aren't super healthy. I know they have nitrates and nitrites and all that stuff that we're not supposed to eat. But out of self-defense, I was like, it is a $5 chicken. And it is something that's already cooked. I can slice it into sandwiches. I can shred it up into chicken salad. I don't have to think about cooking. And so for 2 weeks, that's what I lived off of, because I was like, okay, like, yes, healthy eating is important, but I also have all these things I need to get done. And I don't have the emotional capacity, the energy to put into cooking. So does that make sense how we have to kind of balance like our values and our emotional capacity, our time resources? A bigger example would be, when your business is going super busy, but you also have this value of family and, you have your family at home. Where do you focus your time? And that can also lead to burnout because we have two things that need a lot of attention. And where do we decide where the time goes? So does that kind of make sense to everyone? Yeah, so, yeah. And so did anyone else start working on the 168 hours a week? Does anyone have any feedback on that little exercise? And Kim, I don't think you were here last week, so we can fill that in later. I happen to know Kim. She's an awesome realtor if anyone's in Colorado.
I was going to say about the 168 hours, like I kind of had to adjust that really, because I know for me, it's not so much about the hours, it's about the energy. And it's something I realized a while back that usually there are more hours in the day than the amount of energy that I have, like at the moment. So it's kind of like I'm really planning that every day. A certain amount of it's every week, but mostly it's every, when you wake up and go, okay, how much energy do I have today? And it's that's just how I have to plan things. Because I know that I could easily run out of energy at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then I'm not really going to be able to do anything useful, for the rest of the day.
And that's a great point. And that's part of what we were talking about with like that personal time and how we talked about, like, you really have to look at what are my needs. Because we talked about looking at all these different things. And so that is a great point to bring in, because like, I know that I have an afternoon slump between like 4:30 to 6. And so I don't schedule anything that needs a whole lot of brain power in that time. And I know when we have different things going on, there's a lot of different things can affect where we have energy. So like I said, we're not trying to schedule out that's 168 hours completely. Like, that's not what we want to do at all. It's just to kind of start putting things into perspective. So thank you for bringing that up.
It's just kind of, I know I have to look at it that way, because I know that there's very easily going to be a couple of hours a day where I can, that are going to be catching up with a film or reading a book, because I'm not able to do anything productive.
Excellent self-awareness. Anyone else want to share any realizations? Okay, Gina.
So I realized that I'm putting the only one putting pressure on myself is me, like, for some of these things. So it's really silly for me to get stressed out about like making dinner or whatever it has to be, because I'm the one that's putting the pressure on. No one else. The expectations I'm setting for myself don't necessarily match up with what I have going on in my real life. So like you said, with the rotisserie chicken, I'm buying salad that's already washed or taking shortcuts here and there, where it's just freeing to be able to not put this pressure on yourself and realize that you can't do it all, and that you have to like kind of take a step back and say, wait, why does this have to be done by 5 o'clock today? Or why does this have to be done by this time? when it really doesn't. I just made that deadline up. So things like that, I thought it was really eye-opening to see.
That's awesome that you were able to recognize that, because we do that so much. And, I was talking to Michelle after last week, because I personally, like, after we finished last week, there was part of me that was like, oh my gosh, this was a fiasco, because I came in like highly stressed out, right? And I watched the video and I realized I did not look stressed. So I was pretty proud of myself. But, here I have this thing going on in my head that's saying like, oh my gosh, like you're behind schedule and people aren't going to wait around and you have to do this. And like you said, we're just creating these unrealistic expectations for ourselves. We're feeling this pressure when we're the only ones putting pressure on ourselves. And a lot of times, like if we reach out to those around us and check in, they're like, yeah, I don't know why you do that. I mean, that's your thing. And I've had people tell me that before. I'm like, okay. So excellent that you were able to see that and recognize that. And I think that's going to take us into where we want to go. Here we go, Canva. And and so here's all my information for anyone who wants to reach out, wants to contact me. Like, even if you don't want to work as like coach client, I'd love to learn more about your business, what you do, because I'm always all about building out my referral network as well. And then one of our things, like I said, mindfulness is a base for a lot of what I do with people, and it can really help us in preventing burnout because it keeps us aware of what's going on. And so I'm sure some of you have a lot more experience with mindfulness than others. So a basic rundown of mindfulness is breathing, for one. So breath work, breathing. And that doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can just be slowing your breathing and making sure you're breathing from the belly, right? Belly breathing is important. Sense of touch, tuning into that sense of touch, sense of taste, sense of sight, sense of sound, sense of smell. And really noticing what's going on around us in our physical world. And one thing I like to do is I have clients practice just focusing on one sense for a couple days and then add in another and add in another until they're used to really bringing in everything at the same time, because that can be overwhelming when we haven't been practicing. And after we have this mindfulness of our physical world around us, that's where this important part of mindfulness of awareness of our thoughts and awareness of our emotions. Because a lot of times, like, we're used to that like constant dialogue in the head, right? And we tune it out. And so actually listening to those thoughts. And a lot of times we're like, I'm busy, I don't have time to feel this right now. Feeling our emotions, seeing what's that? Oh. And so allowing ourselves to feel our emotions, know what they are and where they're coming from. And allowing the emotions to come and go as emotions do. So, makes sense to everyone? Pretty good? Yeah. So we're going to talk a lot about self-care, and then we're also going to talk about different types of rest that do not include sleep. So self-care rule number one that I have, because when I start talking about self-care, almost everyone I know is like, oh my God, I don't practice any self-care. And I'm like, yes, you do. Do you brush your teeth? Do you take a shower a couple times a week? Do you feed yourself? We got some basics covered here. So give yourself credit for things that you already do, because we often dismiss what we already do and we focus on the shoulds. And I should be doing this, I should be doing that. And this is just another way that our inner critic comes in and messes with us. And when we're running a business, when we're trying to, avoid things like burnout, we need to keep that inner critic as quiet as we can. And having it tell us that we're not taking care of ourselves is not a great thing. And so a way to counter that is just be kind and acknowledge yourself for what you do. And with this, you're going to get a copy of this. You'll get a copy of the slides, but I'm also going to attach this actual worksheet itself. So don't worry about writing all this down. This is just for us to get kind of a basic awareness of the different elements of self-care, because we have physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual, personal / growth. And then I put financial and professional in one element usually. Today, we're going to look at those a little bit separately because you're all small business owners. And so that takes a little bit more focus on each of those, right? So again, don't worry about like writing all this stuff down, reading it right away. These are kind of general ones. We're going to get also into some that are more designed for small business owners too. So when we're looking at self-care, there's 3 different types of self-care. I know this starts to get really confusing, but I promise it will make sense. So we have different strategies. And so there's self-care, which is taking care of the physical body, right? The mental body, the emotional body, just taking care of ourselves. So that's balance, limits, healthy habits, connections. But we also need nurturing. And we are not taught this in our society. We're not taught to nurture ourselves. We're taught as women to nurture everyone else, right? But not ourselves. And so nurturing is gentleness. We can bring in self-compassion. We can bring in things like soothing touch, where we just give ourselves a hug. Things that bring us pleasure and comfort, relaxation and play. And then one aspect of the self-care that it needs to be there to a degree. And I know I've worked with some clients where escapism is like 90% of their self-care, and we don't want it there, but we need a degree of escapism, which is watching movies, reading a fiction book, things that allow us to forget about our work, about our lives, and just go off into fantasy land. And so it's a lot more than books and movies, but kind of general, easy examples there. Oops. Was that enough time on this page? Everyone good with this? Okay. So let's look at physical self-care. Move my little bar here. So physical self-care, when we are small business owners, sometimes we're working out of our house. And a lot of times, even if we're not working from home, we still have a home office. And so have a dedicated work area, or it could be 2 areas. But you need one area that's just for work. And then you need areas that are off limits for work. So for me, I do probably 90 to 95% of my work in my office here. Sometimes when my brain really needs to expand, I go out in my living room and I set up with the computer on my couch because I need a bigger space. And it's just how my brain works. I need a bigger room. But I don't do work in my bedroom. I don't do work anywhere else except most of it in my office, a little bit in the living room. Making sure that you're eating lunch in the day, like eating meals throughout the day is important. And a lot of us, when we're working, especially for ourselves, we don't stop and take lunch. Remembering to breathe, short breaks where you can stretch, walk, and hydrate. And then this 20-20-20. So this is something that the American I can never say it right, ophthalmological or the Eye Doctor Association. They really recommend this. And this is for anyone who works on computers a lot and I'm not great at this. I'm really not. I try. I maybe do it a couple times a day, if we're being honest. And so when you're on a computer all day, they recommend to avoid eye strain and keep your eyes healthy, that every 20 minutes, you take a 20-second break where you look at something at least 20 feet away. And so for me, my computer faces a wall where I have a giant window. So I just look across the street. I look at the trees. I look, out the window because we don't always have a space in our house that's full 20 feet away. So that's really good physical self-care that not a lot of us are very good at, or not a lot of us practice very well. Taking time off when you're sick. as a small business owner, this is so important. We, like I talked about last week, when we're, our own boss, sometimes our boss is the biggest jerk we've ever worked for, because like, no, you don't have time to take off for being sick. Other things have to be done. Maybe you're not working with clients, but you still need to work on books. You need to do this, this, and this, right? So take time off when you're sick. Take time off for vacations, even if you're not going anywhere. Even if it's just a day to go see, a park or a museum, something like that. Comfortable clothing is so important to keep us in a good mood. And comfortable clothing for me, this came in when I was really practicing mindfulness. There's certain fabrics now that I hate wearing. And I just hate it. And so I don't wear those anymore. It doesn't matter if it looks professional. It doesn't matter if it looks good. If it's scratchy, I'm crabby and I'm not wearing it. And then the basics of physical self-care, safety, sleep, healthy food, and hydrate. And so let's look at emotional self-care here. So emotional self-care is decorating our workspace, including colors and comfort items. Like if you see behind me, I have all kinds of stuff behind me. Some of it are like things that bring me joy from childhood. The flag is, one of my family members' flag, all these different things, but they bring me comfort and they make me happy. So decorating your space, a big thing that we talked about last week is, as your own boss, we don't have someone to be like, oh, great job, right? And so give yourself a pat on the back, give yourself acknowledgement for what you have accomplished. Soothing touch is emotional, it's physical, it's everything. It's a concept out of Kristen Neff's mindfulness-based self-compassion. And it is just, whether it's hugging yourself, it could be just like, you can't see me doing it, but just kind of like rubbing a hand across your leg, because this is physical touch. It releases our oxytocins and serotonins and all our happy, feel good internal chemicals, right? And it's soothing and it helps us physically, emotionally, and mentally. One of my things that I learned to do when I was working at the trauma center is some days it feels like everything goes wrong, especially in a residential facility. Like there were days where like you couldn't even cry, you were so tired. And so my boss and I would sit down at the table and play a game called What Went Right Today. And one of us would start with, the sun came up. I couldn't see it through the clouds, but I know it's there. And so when you're having a rough day, play this game with yourself. What went right today? Okay, the sun came up. I woke up. Like, start with things that may sound silly, but it kind of gets you rolling. So that's a little bit different than gratitudes, but it can be really, really helpful when it seems like things are not going well. Music is another great one emotionally. And music is another great one for when we're trying to, like, if we actually work from our home. I have different music. So sometimes in the mornings I play music before work and sometimes I don't. But if I do, it's not work music. And then when I sit down to the computer, I have specific music. For me, it's Native American flute music, because that's the one that's calm enough, quiet enough that I can focus on writing or reading or putting things together, whatever I need to do. And then at the end of the day, guess what? I don't play that anymore because that helps my brain dedicate work time. That's one of the ways that for my brain, I separate work from personal life and so you can come up with whatever routine you want for that. For me, it's music. Emotional self-care is also asking for help. Practice receiving without giving. That's really hard for a lot of us who are in helping fields. Laugh, cry, release your emotions. I use candles, or you can use essential oils to, kind of help support your mood. Psychological self-care, flexibility. Flexibility is so important. People show up late, the plumbing breaks, the dog gets sick. life happens. We need to be flexible and bring that into our life personally and professionally if we want to avoid burnout. Of course, working with a coach or therapist to help you, navigate whatever issues you're having, learning something new, reading something unrelated to your profession, especially nonfiction, something you're interested in that has nothing to do with your work, is really great psychological self-care because it's helping the brain like work in different areas, right? Nature walks, tidying your space at the end of the workday, seeing the world in shades of gray. This one kind of goes along with flexibility because we tend to see things in black and white. And sometimes we see things as happening to us or people as, acting out towards us. Seeing the world in shades of gray means, if you wave at someone and they seem to ignore you, instead of going, well, that was rude, go, maybe they had earbuds in, maybe they didn't hear me, maybe they didn't see me, maybe they're caught up in their head, right? We don't know what's going on. And so anything with that, it's really, really important. And it gets us, and I see this as super important these days because our society is getting so polarized. Seeing the world in shades of gray instead of black and white is so essential. Limit social media use. Yeah, social media can do a lot to us psychologically. We start comparing, we see all these things that make us think that we're not as good, everyone else is more successful. Limiting your social media use if you can to an hour a day or less is great, because there's been tons of studies that have been coming out recently that show that, especially with younger people, when they limit their social media use to 20 minutes a day, which is like extreme for our younger people, their anxiety plummets, their depression improves, they start socializing in the real world better, their communication improves. Just pay attention to your social media use for your brain's sake. Practice letting someone else be in charge. That's a big one. It's hard, but it's really important for us to realize like we are not the only one supporting the entire planet. We are not superhumans. Professional self-care, establish and honor your work hours. Be like, these are the times a day, like I may not be working this whole time, but this is a block of time that I am on work. And these are the hours that I'm not on work. We kind of talked about that last week. Set boundaries, which we talked about last week. And someone emailed me after last week and asked about boundaries, and the boundaries we covered, that was just kind of a brief overview. There are all kinds of different boundaries. So they had asked about, doing energy work and energy boundaries, and absolutely shielding is a big thing because I do shamanistic work on the side. And so shielding is a huge thing. And especially as an energy worker, you really need to choose your clients carefully because, a lot can go wrong if you're working with someone with really funky energy, especially if you don't have the skills to do that. So it's always important to choose our clients wisely, but especially in the field of energy work. So taking meal breaks is a professional boundary, saying I'm going to take care of my physical body. Taking time off, identify draining tasks. So we have lots of things as business owners that we do that are draining, that are tiring, that leave us feeling depleted. Identify those. If you can, like if you have the resources to hire someone to take care of it for you, by all means. If you don't, find an app that can help you with it. Like, a bookkeeping app, scheduling app, all these things that we don't like to think about. And then those tasks that you have to do anything, find a way to reward yourself. I am all about reward systems, right? Because that makes us go, okay, if I do this, then I get to go, play in the garden for 10 minutes, whatever it is for you. And be realistic when you're looking at taking on new projects, new clients, new whatever. How much time is it going to realistically take for you to do this? And what are your resources energetically, time-wise, everything? I get myself into trouble with that a lot because I'm like, oh yeah, this will take like an hour to prepare for, and like 5 hours later, I'm like, oh. So read vocation related articles, do workshops and classes, because that helps build our sense of competence, right? Like the more we know, the more competence we have. And that can also help us start to see ways to, like, different directions to take our business. So keep growing. Examine how your work goals and personal goals support each other or in conflict with each other. Like I talked about earlier, family life, work life, right? And there can be a lot of other goals and values that are not in alignment between our personal and professional lives. So kind of take a look at that and see how you can get those into better balance. And assess where personal values, oh, that's basically the same thing. Personal values align or clash with self-employment. So I've kind of thrown a lot so far. We got some more to go. Does anyone have questions? Do you have ideas? Do you want to share things that you're already doing? No?
One thing that I've been trying to do lately, and I don't know, I think it's self-care, is not having to explain myself if I don't want to do something. Okay, that's a good thing. Okay.
That's a good thing. That is when I work with clients on boundaries, and because basically saying you don't want to do something, that's a boundary, that's a no.
Mm-hmm.
And if we say no because, the other person's going to always find a way to work around that, right? And so learning that no is a complete sentence,
Mm-hmm.
no, I can't do that.
Yeah, I just say it just doesn't seem fun to me right now. Or it doesn't,
Yeah.
I just don't want to. And I don't really know why, but I just don't. So.
And that's okay too.
Yeah.
And because we're taught, and especially as women, we're taught that we have to justify ourselves. Like we have to justify our existence, right? And so learning to just say, no, I don't want to. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. So
Yes.
that's a really huge thing. And I'm super proud of you because that's awesome. Because we all struggle
Thank
with it.
you.
A lot of us struggle with that.
Yeah, I've made a promise to myself that if it doesn't feel good, I'm not going to do it for right now. I just need to do that.
Exactly. Yeah. And like we talked about last week, no is not forever no, and yes is not forever yes. So, anyone else want to share?
Yeah, I was going to kind of follow up with what you were saying, and this is, if you ever follow Darren Hardy, he's just more of a productivity mentor and speaker. He's phenomenal, but he says either it's a HE double hockey sticks yes, or it's a HE double hockey sticks no. There's like, if it doesn't just, and I've never forgotten that, if it, and I don't always do well with it, but it did really help me, and it does help me to remember that. Like if it's not, oh my gosh, yes, I would, move appointments, I would move mountains to do X, Y, and Z or experience that, then it should be a no.
Exactly.
It goes back to the draining. And can you just talk for like a second, like the personal values? So like if mine are freedom and integrity, what's my other one? My faith. So how would that, to me, I kind of interpret that, and maybe I want to interpret it. It's like, okay, I don't think I would do well I guess it would depend on the type of employer. I would think I would do better on my own, just because I do have a strong sense of freedom and autonomy. But I know there's people all the time that say, oh yeah, I work for so-and-so, and they give me all kinds of, autonomy and making decisions and things like that. So can you just talk about that for a sec?
So yeah, and it really depends on you, because what freedom means to you is different than what freedom means to someone else.
That's true. Very, very true.
We talk about this in communication too. Like we have to specify what, we have to specify for ourselves, like, what does this value of freedom mean to me? Does that mean that, you know, for me, I talked about last week how I have 2 older animals, and so I need to have time to take them to the vet and to do things and to be home with them. And that's one of my values right now.
Mhm.
And that's not going to be a forever value, obviously.
Mhm.
But, you know, so for me, yeah, that freedom does absolutely conflict with working for someone else, because even a work from home job, I can't really build that schedule around that.
Mhm.
So really, what does freedom, what is faith, what do these mean to you personally? And so doing a little journaling work around that can kind of help you see that.
Okay.
Um, and sometimes where personal values can clash with self-employment, like what's a good example would be, you know, sometimes if financial stability is a value that I hold, we know that self-employment isn't going to be kind of a roller coaster usually. Like there's good months, there's bad months. Sometimes it's a good 6 months and a bad 6 months.
Mhm.
And so if we need that like absolute stability, self-employment, at least in the beginning, is going to be in conflict with that.
Mm.
Like once we get established, maybe things will be different. So that's where it's kind of like, what are your real values? What do they mean? Because for some people, financial stability means, yes, I need to have my own business because then I'm making the money, I'm doing everything, and in the long run, it's going to work out. For other people, it's I need that right here, right now.
Mhm.
And, you know, we can make our own SEP 401ks and we can do these things to save for retirement. But, you know, so it really, does that kind of help a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Because it reminds me when I worked in corporate and they were doing some things that weren't in alignment with what my definition of integrity was. And yeah, I had to leave. It made me physically sick to go there. And it was very much, I realized it was not in alignment with who I was. So.
Excellent. I mean, not that's not an excellent situation, but
No,
excellent that you
yeah, it is
were aware.
that I got out of there and and my husband wasn't happy because I was making an incredible amount of money, but there's no amount of money that I would ever compromise with that value.
And so I think that kind of answers your first question too. So, all righty. Speaking of money, let's look at financial self-care. Awareness of both our business and personal finance responsibilities. Some businesses are going to take a lot more investment than others. And, you know, some of that's going to be taking out loans. And how does that relate to your personal finances? Being aware of things like that. Trimming unnecessary business expenses, which, you know, this is just something we talk about doing it in our personal lives. Like, you know, every year when your home insurance, auto insurance is ready to renew, shop, make sure you're getting the best rate. Same with our business expenses, is look at how much are you paying in credit card fees? What is your business bank account? Like what fees are you paying there? Are there banks in the area? Like anyone in Colorado? I love Bank of Colorado because they have the best small business bank account out there with, you know, very, very minimal fees. I'm not at the place where I'm busy enough to actually be paying fees for them. So it's a really good business bank. They've also supported small business, like women small business owners for many, many years back in the 80s when women couldn't get loans. Bank of Colorado did it. So, and I'm not getting paid by them, I promise. App subscriptions, like where can you trim money there? I use Open Office and LibreOffice instead of Microsoft because I don't feel like paying them $100 a year. I use Wave for my bookkeeping and my invoicing because they make their money in charging me credit card fees, but they do all the bookkeeping I need. I don't need to be paying for a more expensive program at this point. So where can we like actually cut back and save ourselves some money? Developing a budget is not as hard as we make it out to be. We look at like, what are things I absolutely have to pay every month, right? This is how much I need to make. And so it can get much more complex after that, but setting realistic financial goals is also important because, you know, we see this on social media all the time, right? All these people who are like, I am a business coach and I can help you make 6 figures by next month. And I'm just like, okay, yeah, of course you can, sweetie. That's not realistic, you know? And so what's going to happen is I'm going to burn out because I'm feeling like I'm not keeping up with the Joneses. I'm not good enough because I'm not making 100,000 a month. I don't know what I'd do with 100,000 a month. I'm sure I'd find something, don't worry. But I don't think I could handle the volume that would involve too. So save and invest where possible. If you're, you know, struggling, working with a credit counselor, most credit counselors are actually free services who can help you develop a plan to get out of that. And then also shifting from a scarcity mindset of never enough into an abundance mindset. Abundance does not mean excess. Abundance means enough. I am enough. I have enough. You know, the universe is going to provide me with what I need. That sounds simple. It's not easy. Simple does not mean easy. So shifting that mindset from not enough to, you know what, it's going to be okay. That helps save us a lot on burnout. Spiritual self-care can be practicing mindfulness, gratitudes. If there's a way, incorporating spirituality into your work. Like, you know, if you're an energy worker, that's already there, right? How are some other ways that you can, you know, just make sure that that's all in alignment? Check that work aligns with your spiritual values and practices. And this example isn't specifically spiritual, but it's similar to, you know, what you were saying earlier of, when I was in my 20s, I was doing contract work for credit card companies where I was doing promotions. I was that person outside the store saying, sign up for a credit card and get a free gift. And I was making great money. I was in my 20s and making killer money, but I felt like a parasite. It was not in alignment with my values and I hated it. And so when 9/11 happened, that crashed the financial markets and they stopped that. And I was never so happy to be out of a job. So, you know, making sure, especially on a spiritual level, that those values were working in alignment with that. Volunteering for a cause unrelated to the work we do, meditating, singing, finding joy, playing. Like for me, when we're in those moments of sheer joy or immersed in beauty, that is connection with source, with God, with whatever you call, you know, your higher power. Personal growth is expand your knowledge and then use it to expand or shift your business, right? Exploring new interests, nurture budding passions. We all hear all this talk about passion, follow your passion. Passions don't just like show up one day. They're grown, they build. There's something we're interested in, and then we get better at it, and then it builds into a passion. And so as you explore new interests, if you start going, oh, I'm really interested in this could turn into your next passion. One-on-one time, face-to-face time with friends, family. What brings you a sense of purpose? Find moments of beauty in each day. You can advocate for a cause through your business, depending on your business, not always. Making a vision board to kind of see where you want to go. Any questions on any of this so far?
I have a question. I don't know, maybe you're going to cover it. I'm wondering, you know, depending on where a person is in their mental health, you know, like maybe they just went through something, or, you know, they had a loss, or, you know, whatever, you know, and so looking at that, like singing might be like, there's no way they're going to start singing, you know? Like, I wonder if there's basic self-care that you can start with like for each of these to say, like, if you're down here, like just start doing these things to kind of get you going, or
And
do you know what I
usually,
mean?
yeah, because usually like I work with people one-on-one depending on their situation and where they are.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like let's take the example of a loss. We're in this process of grief. And so part of it is just understanding that the grieving process is a transitional process where we transition from a physical relationship with someone to a spiritual relationship. And that can be as long or short as we need. There is no timeline. But where we do with that is then we start looking at, okay, let's start focusing on some happy memories about that person. Like, tell me times where that person made you laugh or brought you joy or, an act of kindness. Like, we start focusing on that there. And then when we start focusing on that in our grief, we can start to expand out. And that's where I talk about like finding moments of beauty in everyday life. Because there was a once upon a time that I taught this one to myself long before I did a lot of my work, because I was going through a really dark time. And I noticed that everything I saw was negative. Like the news was negative. Everything that happened was negative. Like everyone around me was negative. And I went, this isn't me. This isn't who I am. And so I challenged myself to find one object of beauty every day. Whether it was like a sunset, whether it was, a little wildflower growing up in, the middle of the desert and rocks. Something that I could appreciate that reconnected me with nature, with myself, with my soul, and with source. Does that kind of make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And usually, even when we're in those really dark places, like that's a place we can start, because it can be like the smile on someone's face. It can be anything.
Mm-hmm. No, I just think, I think it's interesting because looking at the list, it's like, you'd be in a really great spot, I think, if you're doing all this stuff, right? Like this is
You're
like,
doing all this, and again,
yeah,
these are just all examples.
right.
I'm not saying you have to do all these things. These are
Yeah,
examples,
yeah.
and these aren't the only answers. These are just a starting place to kind of spark ideas for you.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we're doing all that, like, man, I would be awesome if I was doing like every single thing on that list. I would be like,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it might be something to strive for,
Yeah.
or maybe be like, oh, I should do this now, or I don't know.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
these are just ideas to spark you,
Mhm.
because there's a lot of other things I don't have on the list. Like for me, like one of my self-care things, I talked about the candles. People joke about like, do you own a Yankee candle store? No, I just have different scents for different moods and different seasons and different weather. And the same goes with my tea. Like I have a huge tea cabinet that, because it depends on my mood right then and what I need emotionally, because tea is emotional, it is mental, it is physical for me. And that's another big important thing, is a lot of these things we do for self-care, they can cross over, because you've noticed how there's a few things on different slides that are the same. There's a lot of crossover. For me, having a cup of tea can be self-care in 3 to 4 different realms. I love food, so there's times that food can be a downright spiritual experience for me. So yeah, no, I'm not saying you have to do all these things. My goodness, no, I should have started with that, so thank you. They're just ideas of places to start and explore.
Right. And just to kind of pick out the ones that are important or priority to you. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And because not all of these things are going to bring us joy. Not all of these things are going to spark happiness in us. It's all about exploration. And that's why this self-care is it's about personalizing what works for you. And then also, again, with that flexibility, we have to be flexible, because what worked for me a year ago is not necessarily working for me today. And music that was stress relief when I was living at the trauma facility is actually a little overwhelming to me today, because it was a high intensity vibe there. So I needed high intensity music to kind of release. And now I listen to some of that, I'm like, whoa, that's a little too much. So being flexible with this, yeah, you're in no means do you have to try even a quarter of these. Just we want to be balanced in each area. So, and that's what this next screen is going to be, is kind of looking where you're out of balance.
Mhm.
And where you're out of balance, just, you know, use these examples as something to try or spark an idea of something different. And so what I do with my clients when we look at self-care is this is on the back of the self-care worksheet that we started with in the beginning. And I have everyone just draw a dot or put like a dot, like how fulfilled are you in each of these realms of self-care? And usually we have this tarantula looking thing, right? Like we might be going, well, physical self-care, I got that, but emotional and spiritual, I'm like right down here in the center, like psychological, maybe I'm up here. And so we have this crazy looking thing when we connect the dots. And so it's like, okay, so start, you know, exploring self-care in these different realms and start to see how you can balance it out. Because life is all about balance. It's about balance between work and professional or work and personal life. It's about balance in our self-care. It's about finding that internal balance, right? So, and you're going to get a copy of this too. And so what I like to have people do is the first time they do this, use one color ink and like put a little date on the side. And then a month later, come back with a different color ink and do it again and put the date and like just keep going to see your progress. And it's not about like good or bad. It's not about like, wow, look how good I'm doing. I mean, it is, but it's about, you know, just looking for balance and saying, okay, it's not that this is bad. I just need to pay a little more attention to, you know, my personal life or my spiritual life or whatever, right? Does that kind of make sense to everyone? And did that kind of answer your question, Michelle?
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Oh, we are really getting close on time. I am so sorry. I kind of was afraid of this. So what I'm going to do is the rest of these slides, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just put them in what I send to Kim and what I email to the rest of you who aren't with Alternative Balance. And so I'm just going to give you a quick summary. And that's why I actually wrote a lot on the rest of the slides because I didn't know if we'd get to them. So there's a book by Sandra Dalton Smith called Sacred Rest. Some people really love the book. Some people struggle with it because she's very, very Christian. And so, of course, she brings in a lot of Bible verse, and some people have issues with that. If you're not super Christian, if you can read past it, it's a really good book. If you are super Christian, you'll love it, I think. She doesn't give quite as many ideas on types of rest as she does. She goes into a lot of detail about deficits in the types of rest, but she doesn't quite give us a lot of ideas. So that's kind of what I did with the slides. But what she did was she wrote this book because she's a doctor. And she talked about how she realized that sleep wasn't enough. Like she was still exhausted. It didn't matter if she slept 18 hours, she was still exhausted. And so you're going to notice that a lot of things on the next slides are really similar to some of what we talked about in self-care. I also noticed as I read this that some of what she talked about is really similar to a book called The Artist Way by Julia Cameron, just a different take on it. And so we want to be able to do physical rest, mental rest, emotional rest, spiritual, social, sensory, and creative. Physical rest is not sleep, it's movement that leaves us energized. So it can be like stretching and move like light movement. It can be Epsom salt baths. What leaves you feeling rejuvenated? And I'm going to fly through these, you'll get the slides. Mental rest is releasing the mental baggage and chatter. So that can be meditation or reducing activities that drain you mentally. We already talked about that, huh? Oh, and then also when we're ruminating, focusing on aspects like joy, love, kindness, other things that bring us peace. So it could be like the look on a child's face. It could be a lot of different things. You can just kind of focus on that to kind of quiet some of the mental chatter. Emotional rest is when we're so busy basically performing and trying to meet other people's expectations. And so it's practicing vulnerability and authenticity in a safe way with those you can be vulnerable and safe around. Spiritual rest is mending our soul where we feel broken or disconnected from source. Social rest is, we talked last week, someone brought in like a friend who was kind of draining, where social rest is being with people who are the opposite of that, who leave us feeling energized and uplifted, and one-on-one contact with people for that true connection. Sensory rest is a big one for a lot of us. And so it can be, closing our eyes, turning off the music, things like that. Or it could be something that counterbalances where we're overwhelmed in a sensory way. So an example would be like, if you've been staring at a computer screen all day and your eyes are just tired, maybe you need to just go lay in a dark room for 15 minutes and close your eyes. Or maybe you need to go watch the squirrels play in the backyard. Both of those would count as sensory rest depending on what you need. Creative rest is immersing ourselves in beauty. It could be listening to a symphony. It could be going to a museum. It could be watching the sunset. It could be, hiking through the mountains. Whatever is beauty that restores your soul, basically. And it can inspire creativity, but it is not intended to make you go paint. And that's it. And I forgot to put one book on here, so I'll probably add that before I email this out, as I did forget to put in the self-compassion book. But these are some different books that you can look at for different things. Breakthrough is written towards women, just having struggles that we do in our professional lives. The Artist Way, I already mentioned. Sacred Rest, I already mentioned. Trauma Stewardship is a really interesting one. She takes kind of a indigenous view of taking care of yourself as you're working with people in trauma. And so you don't have to be a trauma therapist to get a lot out of this book, though. And then Transforming the Pain is going to be much more like not analytical. That's the closest word I can come up with right now, though. Like, it is based on a whole lot of research, but they're also working with different methods for people to work through burnout and vicarious traumatization. And like I said, I will add Kristen Neff's mindfulness-based self-compassion, so you guys can check that one out too. There we go. So
Cool.
I meant to leave a little bit more time. I know we're at time, so if anyone has to leave, I totally understand. But if you have a couple minutes, I would love any questions. Does anyone have any more questions? No. And as I said, if you're interested in working with me with burnout or any other issues, I'm more than happy to. Otherwise, I'd also love to get to know you more about you and your business and what you're doing, because I enjoy meeting people. That's just me. So please feel free to reach out. And anyone who does sign up for sessions, who's been in the webinar or is an alternative balance member, gets, of course, a free consultation and then 25% off your first 4 sessions. So
That's great. Thank you, Jen.
all righty.
This was great. So I'll put the presentation in the Facebook group and the recording from today, and also I'll send it as an email to everybody, so you'll get that. But Thank you for coming.
Alrighty, thank you, Gina.
Thank you. This was great information. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Okay,
Thank
good
you.
day. I've got to run.
Alrighty,
All right, enjoy your day.
thank you guys, take care.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.